morning and welcome to Government with Uplift Education and Miss Williams. My name is Miss Williams, and today we will be talking about the 7 principles of government. 7. There are 7 total principles of government. We're going to go through all of them today. So when we talk about the 7 principles of government, we are talking about the foundation of government as we know it today, the foundations of democracy as we know it today. We're talking about how we get individuals that we trust in order to vote for us, because we were talking about voting in our first lesson. But we need to know where these principles originated and where the concepts and ideas behind the voting process come from. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the 7 principles of government. Again, there are 7 total principles. The first one is limited government. The second, popular sovereignty. The third, republicanism. The fourth, federalism. The fifth, a separation of powers. The sixth, checks and balances. And the seventh, individual rights. Individual rights. So if we take a look at the diagram, we can see that there's a pyramid similar to a flowchart that shows kind of the hierarchy of individual rights. It shows individual rights to the people through the flow to the power to rule, through the flow to the power to the people to elect representatives in order to represent them. When we are looking at individual rights, we're looking at economic rights related to property, meaning that you have the right to own your home or to own your property, and no one can take it away or seize it from you once you own it. We're looking at political rights related to the freedom of speech and press. Sounds familiar. That's because we'll find that in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution as well as some other civil liberties such as the freedom to assemble and the freedom of religion and some other individual rights. We're looking at personal rights related to bearing arms and maintaining private residences. We see this when we talk about the right to bear arms in our Second Amendment, and when we talk about addressing quartering soldiers in our Bill of Rights as well as the Bill of Rights in the preamble. Leads right on into it, right? We also see evidence of individual rights in our Declaration of Independence when we talk about the idea of life, liberty, and having the ability to pursue your own happiness. When we talk about individual rights, we're also talking about inalienable rights. These are the rights that you are given, that are given to you naturally at the time of birth, that no one can take away from you. So now that we've kind of outlined what individual rights are, individual rights, why are they important? Because they outline all of the necessary and the freedoms that cannot be taken away from you as an individual person. So we want to say that, okay, this is the biggest important piece, because individual rights are what's going to carry us through every other principle of government as we go. So the next principle of government we're going to look at is the principle of limited government. When we look at limited government, we're talking about the Constitution and the laws that define the limits of those in power. When we talk about limits, oftentimes we're used to hearing that command term in IB when we're talking about to what extent. This would be a great conversation to build a response on as far as to what extent, because we're talking about specific limitations. The Constitution and laws that define the limits of those in power so that they cannot take advantage of their elected, appointed, or inherited positions. Elected meaning they were voted into it, appointed meaning someone told them that they have it, or inherited meaning that it was given to them based on either a chronological order, meaning that they were the next in line for that position, or meaning that it was inherited, meaning that their father had it, their father passed away, or their father is no longer able to take the position, and then it is passed down. Everyone, including all authority figures, must obey the laws or rule of the law, and the government is restricted to do what it may do. And we can find this in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the United States Constitution. So let's talk a little bit about limited government. The first time we see limited government is around 1215, when we're looking at King John, and he had to proclaim certain rights per the Magna Carta. In the Magna Carta, we saw that he was actually forced to give the people some sort of authority, kind of, not really, but just a little bit. He was, for the first time, bound by the law. He couldn't just do whatever it was that he wanted to do. The people had rights, and this was the first time that we saw this exercised. We also saw the writ of habeas corpus, or the right to appeal. It was no longer off with your head or to the prison, and no one could do anything about it, because now you had the right to appeal. Whatever the king said wasn't the end all be all. It gave the people some sort of power to be able to protect themselves against the crown. So when we talk about limited government, we're definitely talking about setting those boundaries. Healthy, natural, but boundaries nonetheless. So the next concept we're going to talk about is popular sovereignty, which is a very popular concept. When we're talking about popular sovereignty and we talk about sovereignty, sovereignty is to rule. When we talk about popular, or when we talk about popularity, it should make you think of people. I mean, it's how we govern or rule as a people, whether the governing body of people will be the ones that are making the decisions. Popular sovereignty means that that body of people, or that the people are given power in order to make decisions in government. So let's take a look at some of the high points for popular sovereignty. Number one, popular sovereignty, political power rests with the people, who can create, alter, or abolish the government. It also allows people to express themselves through voting and free participation in government. And the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution and the preamble both begin with "we the people," letting you know where the power or where the authority lies. And the power comes from the people. So let's talk about this. So we're talking about the 7 principles of government, but it's hard to talk about the 7 principles of government without talking about some of the social contract theories and where some of these ideas come from. So the first concept we talked about was a limited government, and limited government was supported by John Locke. He believed that there should be limits within the government, and that the people should exercise some power, and that the government should also have its own respective power. However, we are looking at popular sovereignty, and we're looking at popular sovereignty, and I brought up John Locke because John Locke also supported popular sovereignty. Again, he believed that there should be power in the government and that the people should have power themselves as well. He also believed that the person had individual rights, those inalienable rights that we talked about that no one can take away from you. So when we're talking about all of these principles of governments and where they're coming from, we're noticing that they're coming a lot from the social contract theories and a lot of the ideas that they set forward about how the government should be run, as well as how they pair with other documents such as the English Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, and the United States Constitution. So now that we're talking about representation and how we are voting in the United States Constitution, let's talk about republicanism. Republicanism is a philosophy of limited government with elected representatives serving at the will of the people. Government is based on the consent of the governed, meaning that the people have to agree to the contract. And we can find this in the preamble and in Article 1. This is important because in the social contract theory, we talk about legitimacy as far as people abiding to the contract. When we talk about the contract, we talk about people's willingness to agree with the current government. In order for a government to be legitimate, the people have to agree, and they have to willingly or willfully agree to whatever the terms are of the law of the land. Therefore, when we talk about the government must be based on the consent of the governed, we're saying that the people must agree to the rules or the law of the land of that government in order for it to be successful. And that is one of the key concepts of republicanism. And in republicanism, we want to remember that people vote for representatives, someone that will represent you and then vote for you, not necessarily your direct vote. So the next principle of government we're going to look at is a separation of powers. And when we talk about a separation of powers, we're looking at a system to where we can regulate our government, where we have our legislative branch, our executive branch, and our judicial branch. When we're talking about a separation of powers, we don't want it all concentrated into one place, because that's the issue that we found when we were declaring our independence. We didn't want all the power to go to one person, because then one person makes the decision. There's no one else to say, hey, that may be right, or hey, maybe you're a little bit wrong on this one. So we wanted to spread the power out, and the concept of separation of powers is simply what it says. It's to separate that power so not too much power goes into one place. Which brings us into the checks and balances. Checks and balances is all about regulating that separated or the division of power. Now that we've all divided the power, aren't they now all equal? Not necessarily. Some branches actually have more powers than others, such as the executive branch with the power to veto. So that even if Congress decides that they want to make a decision, they can say, hey, I'm going to use my executive power to stop you from passing the law or passing the resolution that you want to get passed. With that being said, with the checks and balances, Congress also has the right to check the president. Hey, we don't agree with what you said, so we're not going to allow you to do this. Or there are certain powers that are given to each branch so that they all play off of each other. But they're all given specific checks so that they're able to regulate how much that particular branch is able to exercise their power. And last but not least, we're looking at federalism. Federalism. We hear about federalism a lot when we talk about the Articles of Confederation, but we don't really talk about it very much when we talk about principles of government. When we're talking about federalism, we're talking about a division of power between the federal government and the state government. There are certain things that the federal government can do or that they can enforce upon its people that the state government cannot, and vice versa. We see this a lot in most recent times, especially when we're looking at the heartbeat law. One of the cases that we focus on in government is Roe versus Wade, when we're talking about the right of choice and the right to abort. When we're looking at the heartbeat law, we're looking at some states that say, hey, we're not going to allow this, even though the federal government says that it's okay. We see the same thing when we talk about drug usage in different places. One state may say, hey, you can't use this here, such as like CBD products and CBD oils, which have been proven to help those cancer patients or those that are dealing with issues with their muscles or stress. But in other places, they say no. And that's because the states have the power to make their own decisions based on federalism, even if the federal government or the FDA that is an organization sponsored by the federal government says that it is okay. So we looked at our 7 principles of government today. We looked at limited government. We looked at, which talks about putting limitations on the government. We talked about popular sovereignty, giving power to the people. We talked about republicanism, electing other individuals to go vote for us. We talked about federalism, the separation between the federal government and the state government. A separation of powers, how we regulate our powers and separate them so that all of the power is not centralized in one particular area. We talked about checks and balances, how we keep that power in check by exercising certain powers that we have from one branch on the other branch in order to keep them regulated, and the individual or unalienable rights, which are the rights that are given to you at birth that no one can take away. I had a great time meeting up with you guys today, and I look forward to hanging out with you guys again for our next section. Have a great day and see you next time.